Welcome to my view from the piano bench. We do this on Wednesday evenings at 7 p.m. hopefully, here in my Joe Holt's Notes YouTube channel. Sometimes there's some variations on the theme. I'll do the best I can. Thank you for understanding. We're keeping this going after several years, and it's cool, and I'm enthused about it. And I'm enthused about today in particular for some clarity that came to me this morning. Thank you to those of you who support and encourage me through the links you'll find on the support page of my website. You'll see a link to that in the video description. Those of you who do provide ongoing support, you've stuck with me through all of this. Thank you so much. And we're in a different place, of course, than we were initially, and the idea of supporting something like this online is in a different place societally and everywhere and in every regard since the pandemic. But if you would consider this, to any extent at all, small extent, if you do watch regularly, it would be much appreciated. It sponsors these videos. There's no other monetization or funding source. But I am delighted to be able to continue this. Anyway, I'm going to keep going and also tell you, but you probably know this, that I have a Thursday night video, formerly live stream, Piano for My Friends. And I'm looking forward to recording that one. But right now, we're talking about some clarity that came to me this morning. I was just pondering what I would talk about, and there's different things, and I've gone through different approaches with this. I do feel like I'm on a bit of a roll, or I'm going to keep using this word clarity, apparently, little heightened clarity about the whole thing, and in reflecting about students that I have and had, and where breakthroughs have happened, and where you really see successes, and sometimes they're hard to come by, and you just keep working at it until you find something that opens up. And it occurred to me that I could describe this in the idea of a prism, and I thought I'd call this Prisms of Clarity. So I only really have the concept in my head, or wherever it is, under my fingernails, I don't know. And so it's something really for me to flesh out. And speaking like this extemporaneously, recording these videos, and some of the videos that maybe you've watched that I posted, have been an example of this. That's the easiest way for me to flesh something out than to sit and try to write about it, and each word is like another tooth has to be pulled sometimes. Occasionally, written words like that come clear, but it takes me hours, what a real writer could do in 20 minutes a lot of times. The stream of consciousness is my life, that and polyphony and a few other things. Oh my goodness. So what do I mean by prisms of clarity? Well, a blinding light or an undefined light or just a splotch of light coming at you, you can't say it doesn't mean anything. It certainly does. It lights the room. It provides the ability to see. It does, it can create warmth, all sorts of things. But as far as finding meaning or organization or anything in that light, it is an abstract process until it passes through a prism, and all of a sudden you see all of the separation of colors. And then you have the ability to like isolate things, organize things, combine things, create things. You know, you have this whole template of colors by which to create whatever you want to create in a larger context. And that's all contained within that splotch of light. I'm speaking very non-scientifically because I'm a non-scientist, scientifically speaking. But you get the idea. So then when the right angle of view is applied, all of a sudden, whammo, there it is. And I'm reflecting on my, teaching style. And in the last, 20 years or so, or more even, I haven't done a lot of teaching. Maybe 20 years ago, I was for a while doing one day a week in a music store. But that's been a long time. And of course, when I was younger, and I've told you this, especially when I was a teenager in my early 20s, I kept a lot of students because as soon as I turned 17, I got a driver's license. And when I was 17, I was still living at home with my parents, of course. Then I just advertised to go to homes and picked up all these students, word of mouth, blah, blah, blah. And, I enjoy inspiring people. I enjoy passing on the information. And I enjoy seeing people have breakthroughs. I really enjoy that. And upon reflecting, at this point, in my process, which is many years in, it's really about the breakthrough. And if I'm teaching an absolute beginner, I get pretty adamant about this, and I've talked about it. I'm going for the breakthrough from lesson number 1. Giving concepts, giving musical direction, not simply this is this makes you do that. It's not the passing along of information. And that's what a lot of, learning is, learning information. There's lots of information that you learn in music. But if it's a big splotch of light and you stare at it and it just blinds you after a while, what good is it? Right? And so even at the very, very basic level, I'm going through the breakthrough. I'm going for the prism of clarity. Like I gave the example before about, a very beginner student that if I'm playing, right? What would you learn and what would your method book say? It would say, count evenly. Make sure all the counts are even. Okay, that's information, and that's a procedure, and that's good. Accent or make the first beat of the measure, the first, let's say beat, but really count of the measure really a little louder. Right? And that's a, mechanical process and all of that. But even with the beginner, and this is something, and I'm realizing this is what I was counting on while talking, that it's like, it's not addressed in the passing along of information, which is the breakthrough. The breakthrough can happen before any information is given, right? The breakthrough can happen to a toddler. The breakthrough can happen to a 95-year-old, beginner. And you always want to be open to that prism diffusing the light and giving you clarity as to what's inside, right? So, the example I often talk about, and I've done this with beginner students, is I stay with the idea of not mechanically counting and all of that. I mean, yeah, but you want to be able to do that. But it's about feeling the pulse, feeling where the 1 is. some students, not maybe, there certainly are some students who struggle with that, and rhythm is not their thing. They're going to be really benefited by having that stress to them at the beginning. It's really hard to go back with something like that. But feeling the one is its own breakthrough right there, being able to do it. And then demonstrating, like to a 6-year-old, that 6-year-old is feeling where the one is, and somebody else is feeling it too because they are, and that's a big deal. You know, you've heard this before if you watch, but I'll say it again anyway. You know, where if I'm in somebody's house, I wait for the parent to come through the room, and if it's not going to happen, I'll arrange for it. But this can just be spontaneous and say, hey, hang on a minute. I want you to listen to little Johnny here. And Johnny's prepped, and I'm going to do this if Johnny can feel the one and, you know, portray where the one is. And without fail, the parent starts tapping their foot and say, hey, Johnny, look at this. Why is your mom tapping her foot? Did you tell her? How does she know to tap her foot? What do you do? And you go through all this, and that way the student realizes the breakthrough, right? And, you know, breakthroughs having to do with, you know, any kind of clarity that you have in playing, right? So I was thinking about, you know, examples with students about clarity and what that clarity looks like. And of course I should have written it down, because right now I'm not coming up with all of them, but I thought about 3 specific examples over the years. Okay, I got one. And this is, okay, and it's about understanding the essence of what you're doing as opposed to just remembering a bunch of information. Now, there are some learning styles, to use a phrase that I don't usually use, but some use, that really focus on information and the cerebral retention and all of that. But even with that, you can have those moments of clarity that get beyond through the prism of clarity. So when I was not too many years into teaching, I guess I was my 20s. It's somewhere in my 20s. And I remember at that point, I was using the facility of the church that I was music director of. So it had to be in my 20s because I left that when I was 30. And I had a student, and she was a vocalist, and she had a specific agenda. And I was all about helping her fulfill that agenda. And that's the other thing too. To have clarity for someone, you have to meet them where they are. I was telling someone today that there's a school of thought out there that you should change piano teachers periodically. You know, I've heard every 18 months, or just music teachers in general. And that can come across as a shock to people. But the reason is, or the idea behind it is, that you're going to get exposed to different perspectives from each teacher, right? That's good. The downside of that is that if one of those perspectives doesn't line up, the whole thing may crash. You know, so you do have to have a sense of connection between, you know, what the teacher is doing and what the student is receptive to. All right, and what was that? That was the piano manifestation of a brain fart. All right, so I'm talking about a student I had many years ago, uh, and the specific agenda was that she wanted to accompany herself singing. Right? And I could pass along all kinds of information, but really there was something that was going to, there needed to be a sense of conceptual clarity for her, and it was easy to see. And I don't know that I had actually dealt with it before then. Because I mean, a lot of things that I've learned in teaching or just learned in general is like looking at an issue and then, okay, here's this little problem. How do you solve it? You know, what's the angle of entry? And she said to me she really wasn't that motivated to even learn to read music, and I was okay with that. Because I could see that there was a focus on something. And also, too, all of that could come later. But we had this connection that she had with this. So we're talking about chords, we're talking about bass notes. And a little, not side trip, but a little opening up the subject for a minute. The challenge, one of many, of playing the piano solo is that you have more ground to cover than you have hands to cover them, right? So yeah, and that can be a real source of confusion. But if you take the melody of a song away because somebody's singing it or you're accompanying, then it becomes actually pretty easy. That would be a phrase of a very well-known song without the melody. But there's at least a chance, if not a good chance, that you're like, if you didn't hear the melody, you heard that there's something there to hear. Let me play it again, and then I'll play the melody. There. So now you know where you heard that before. But you couldn't see all my hands, but you could hear that all of a sudden the simplicity of what I was doing became much more complicated, because now I have to do three distinct things with two hands, and now I have to divide up the pie and all this stuff. But if I just take my bass note, something like that, and actually in today's contemporary music, chord progressions are just basically looped. You have just like 6 chords. And I'm making it even more complicated than it typically is, and you just repeat. I played a gig better part of a year ago. It was some, I don't know what it was. It was some celebration or fundraiser or something, and the current Miss Maryland was there as like some focus or feature or something, and she sang with a band, and then she used my keyboard and she accompanied herself. And what she did, and this is like the perfect like early 20s culture thing. She had her chords, and she memorized those things. Very, very simplistic, but pop music is very simplistic today, especially. And she just played her chord roots, and she played her chords in the right hand, and you could tell her whole thing was that very narrow thing, and she's looking down and she's remembering it and everything. But it's like, yeah, that's what you do. But that's not just a simple thing you do. It's a foundation you can build on. So if I take... I can stick the melody in there. So now I'm taking that and really running with it, but it starts from the clarity of, just play a bass note in your left hand, chord in your right hand, sing. And let's go back to that first beginner piano lesson, if I get to teach it, which is, and make sure that you communicate where one is. And who cares what you do in between the ones, as long as you're in control of it. Yeah, so you have that real simple clarity of that starting point, right? That this here, and then just those simple things build on, and that's like taking the colors of the prism and starting to organize them, as opposed to, what do I do? Right? So that can be, an entry point, a prism of clarity in. And I've used that before, but this specific example, I've used this in it with other students. This specific example is cool because if you go to my lessons page, and I have some like testimonials from students, a few years ago, she showed up on one of my Facebook posts. And this is now decades later, right? And she married a musician, and they perform in, clubs and retirement communities. And that's what they do. Okay? And she connected with me, and she said something, and I copied it onto... She did it in a public forum. And when people comment publicly, either on mic or online or something, I feel that's a public statement. I can use it. So, of course, she wouldn't let me use it anyway. But she said, because of you, I can perform in the clubs, or whatever. Like she credits that, and I haven't heard her play since then, but I am positive that she has taken that and run with it. Now, she doesn't need to do anything else because of, she self-accompanies. But that was her sort of prism of clarity. Now, let me clear my head, because I came up with two other examples, and I can think of one of them right now. I want to think of the other one, decide which one I want to talk about next. What does this have to do with anything? So with the idea of this prism of clarity, and no, I did not think of the thing I was trying to remember, but that's okay. With this idea of the prism of clarity, it does require, there to be something underneath of it. And it does require understanding, cognitive, intuitive, and so you are passing along information, but what music is about is expression. And this is, I think, the bottom line of all this. Music is not about just the simple passing along of information. Music is about expression. And then you find what I would call the handle on the suitcase for you in order to transition into something that expresses from your humanity, as opposed to is a procedure you're following, right? And so in any case that I would cite here, and funny that I can't remember one of them, but that's all right. Any of the case I would cite would be contingent upon, there being the light happening in the first place, really. So, I'm always looking for that thing that makes the light bulb go on, right? And when the light bulb goes on, everything follows it. So there was one student, and what I'm noticing is that from time to time, the rhythmic feel settles into some real clarity. And it's like the person's playing, and it's not wrong, but it's not engaging. It doesn't move you, and then all of a sudden it does. And then you have these moments of rhythmic clarity. And this kind of goes back to the sample about the beginner student, right? In a way too. And then it goes away, and then it comes back, and then it goes away. And it's like, whoa, there are moments when expression is really happening. So what's the point of clarity that opens up the prism? For the one self-accompanying singer, it's the understanding of a procedure that gets them in the door. In this case, it's coming back to things that bolster the rhythmic feel. I'm struggling to make this make sense, but this particular student can actually read transcriptions of like stride pieces and stuff better than I can. It's brain's more focused with this. If I play a transcription, I play it in order to immediately depart from it and find my own way. But all of a sudden, bang, like this, after talking about it for a while and suggesting practice strategies and all of that, I'm listening to him play. And I start walking around the room, snapping my fingers on 2 and 4 throughout the entire piece. All of a sudden, I am moved to just, man, this is in the pocket. And as soon as that clarity happened, the student had like much more control of everything, because that was the bright light that was blinding. And it's like a simple little switch you flip, and it's not any one thing. So I gave a cognitive example. I gave a more intuitive feeling example. And I'm looking at technically, I mean, we talked about tension, hands, and other stuff. But when it was really locked in, I'm looking, there's really nothing. And I always look for things I could, okay, about your technique, and you do this, but it's like, I don't want to touch any of it, because bang, peg in slot, right? So the larger point of this is that we all have a path in. And I am an idealist. I am the rose-colored glasses guy, where the rose-colored glasses were born attached to my head and they don't come off. And so I don't give up, you know, and you can always make progress. But then you find that one thing that helps everything else make more sense. Now, I told you what that was for me, if you watch these videos. I may have only told the story once, so maybe you haven't heard it. Or maybe twice. But it was the one and the first, and the only for a long time, jazz piano lesson I ever had. And the whole idea of playing jazz was one of those big, bright floodlights that was blinding me looking at it. All I knew was that I didn't get it in terms of, you know, intellectually. And at the time, we're talking like in the early 80s, if you're talking about playing piano, it was the Bill Evans era, you know, who was really influencing things. And, you know, I didn't learn academically. I didn't have the concept. I played tunes. I came up with the Madiris. We did all that. And so I went to a teacher, took one lesson, and it was a kind of a comedy of comedies, which I'll just skip all that. And when he figured out what I was trying to do, I think I confused him because I could play, but I needed clarity. And the angle that he took that opened up the reflection or refraction, or whatever you call it, again, I'm not a scientist guy, that you could see all the colors, was he gave me the concept of 2 5s. Right? And what was the tune? And what that concept does, and that's kind of a traditionally classic way of understanding jazz standards and such. It gives you a handle on the suitcase to look at chord progressions and understand how they're connected. Okay? So all of a sudden, with that one lesson, he opened up all of this playing field for me, and I worked on it on my own for like 2 years. You know, before I sought any other, you know, lessons. But he did not stick a Warner Brothers theme in there like I just did. And I'm playing that tune because that's a tune I think he did. And the reason that I remember that, what I just played there is a typical harmony for that song. I'm in E flat, F minor 7, E flat 7, A flat minor 6, B7, sus, resolve, right? And then he's talking about the 2 5 concept. And he says, okay, well, you can take this up a half step and you can, in effect, sequence it. Instead of, right. Like a, right? Da 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 da. Right? So you can hear that I'm doing it again, just moving up a half step. But I remember saying, but that clashes with the melody. So when you do that, shouldn't you? He said, no, you can just play the same melody, it doesn't matter. And I'm like, what? And then I still don't buy it, right? It doesn't work against the melody. But even though he said something that I didn't agree with, that was part of the clarity. Like, oh, and so that was my clarity, right? And I ran with it. So my motive in doing this, and my thought about it, is that there's a larger thing at play in all kind of learning, right? That we're looking for that eureka moment. We're looking for that inspiration, and you can't look too hard. You have to let it come. But once it comes, maybe you do have to look hard. See, I don't know what I'm talking about. And in my role as a music teacher, perhaps to a fault, at least at times, I'm always going for that. And I think because I don't really have the internal ability to get from point A to point B without the sense of having clarity. What's the handle on the suitcase that I'm picking up that's elevating the entire suitcase? Which is an interesting segue into the broader idea of interconnectedness, something that I've been really pondering, and interconnectedness goes back to ancient and current, spiritual and philosophical traditions and thoughts, but also now is becoming like scientifically a center of gravity with quantum mechanics and everything. That everything touches everything else in ways that we could have never contemplated before. So we have quantum entanglement, that's something like on the far side of Pluto, and something within me is unified. What? But what that has to mean, and I think what fuels all of this, and I've always intuitively understood it, is that if you can touch one of those colors in the prism, something that you can grab, something you can put in your paintbrush, while you're dealing with that, you are touching all the other colors, right? Somehow, some way. And it be related to me telling a student when they're practicing, get as specific as possible about the motive of your practicing at that point. And for me, like if I'm playing a scale, I could be playing a scale in order to kind of touch the extent to which I still have internalized my training in rotation technique, which more than anything has to do with the sense of falling into a note as opposed to pushing. And that's the thing that comes back to ground that for me, right? That's my prism of clarity. So I'll at first just play a very slow scale, and I'll fall into the note, and I will not rotate properly according to the technique, I'm sure. But I'm getting rid of the tension. Falling as opposed to pushing or clutching, which I used to do when I play, and it actually hurts still. And by the way, that's why I still do this. That's a whole nother subject, and I should probably talk about it. I may have talked about it in some other manifestation of the live stream. Now let me write it down, because I try not to talk about it. Why do I wrap wrists? The good part about that is, or the bad part, I won't be able to read what I just wrote. But I'm practicing to that. Or I could be practicing for articulation. I'm trying to have the exact same amount of spacing or connection with each note. Or I could be practicing for tempo. sloppy. Right? I could be practicing for horizontal movement. Right? And I'm taking any one of those things and I'm practicing specifically. And then when you, and this is the point, and I've always believed this, and I've never thought about it esoterically before until more recent years, that that handle on the suitcase, that handle is attached to the suitcase. So you elevate the handle, the suitcase also moves. So it's this interesting how the entire product improves. The entire product is enhanced. The entire thing is affected by isolating one color on the palette, right? And it affects everything. It somehow touches everything. That's crazy esoteric, but it's not crazy at all. And this is a principle with Kenny Warner that I've come to discover, where he will have a student practice one thing meticulously until they totally master it, right? And then it becomes something that they can take to the space without thinking about it. Right? So I had the opportunity to sit down with someone who takes lessons from someone else, and I'm not trying to disrupt that at all. And I've actually done this a couple of times in recent months, where I'll just offer, "Hey, let me mess with your head for a few minutes," and I get a sense of what they're talking about, what they're doing in their lessons, and I go to the other side of the street. It's okay. You're getting this. Think about this. And in one of those cases, it just wildly opened it up for the person, and it was a moment of clarity. And we're all, but that's another thing. When we have that moment of clarity, it's also a moment of inspiration, and it fuels that self-perpetuating flame, right? And I think a tacit motivator for me, the bottom line that I don't think about or talk about, but it's kind of understood for me, is the most important thing about lessons is fueling that artistic flame. Where if you're giving somebody all the great information in the world and they're struggling with it, and they're eventually going to get tired of trying to push the square peg in the round hole, or the round peg in the square hole, however that works. And then once somebody walks away from it, gets motivated or quits, what good is any of the information, right? So you always want to have that sense of connection to it. And for me, if somebody maintains a relationship with music throughout their lives, that's a success. My student / friend who showed up decades later to tell me, yeah, she's a professional musician and she's using exactly what I taught her when she was trying to figure it out, so she didn't have to hire a piano player to sing. Go for it. Or my star student, when I was, going to homes when I was 18, 19 years old, and she was probably 11 or 12 at the time, or 10 or something, and she was always, the last student in recitals. She was playing the most complicated pieces and stuff, and then decades later, maybe 20 years later, after that it all ended and we got disconnected, I wound up having a conversation with her mother, and her mother was afraid to talk to me because she thought I was going to really be hurt. Yeah, because I don't want to tell you this, but change the name. But Susie, she's not playing the piano anymore. She plays the bassoon, and she changed to bassoon and majored in bassoon in college because she wanted to try to get an orchestra gig, and she's doing this and that and the other thing. And I'm like, whoa, wait, stop, whoa. You mean Susie is still playing music and doesn't focus on the piano and took up the bassoon, something I would never think about? And the mother was all apologetic, and I'm like, that's great. I can't imagine better news, because Susie is still involved. That artistic flame, that thing. So where I would have been really disappointed is she had no relationship to music at all. Right? So, moments of clarity. They keep us going forward. That's funny. See how they run. There's a little reharmonization of Three Blind Mice for you. Yeah, I played it more interesting the first time. Yeah, but now I'm thinking about it. Anyway, a mind is a terrible thing to, I don't know. Because I'm still trying to remember that other example. And I remember now. Good. So, this was about 20 years ago. And, or maybe 15. It's what, 15 years ago when I was worship arts director at the Nazarene Church in Chestertown. And I wasn't doing a lot of teaching then, but I had somebody come to me for lessons, and so I used the church. And that's how I remember what the time frame is. And this guy was, obviously could play, but he was just like stuck, and he didn't know what to do. And kind of similar to what Gerald Price did with me with introducing 251, but I did it differently. I gave him a theoretical foundation to think about and play with, and he comes back the next week, and everything is opened up. And I couldn't believe how it all fell in the slot for him. But I just happened to stumble, on the color in that palette that he could focus on and see. And, it was like, man, this guy can play. And we had lessons for a while, and then, it went separate ways. And I remember coming across him every few years, and we'd have a very brief conversation, right? But a few months ago, I'm playing a gig, and he's there. And I'm talking to him, and he's talking about all the stuff he's doing, all the playing he's doing, and all this other stuff. And and had him come up and sit in, but not to play, but to sing, right? Because he sings when he plays. But the level of connection surprised everybody. Surprised me. It was a gig with Sharon. Surprised Sharon. And it was like, bam, and you just need the right handle on the suitcase. So I guess that's the general principle here. And I've gone all over the planet. And if you're still with me, thank you. That is, if something is befuddling, if something is a challenge, there's always another way in. To any of the component parts, to anything whatsoever in that makes it tick, that you can grab onto. Because if you can grab onto it, you're touching everything else by doing it. And if it's something that you can grab onto and actually pick up, then you're golden. And I guess this clarifies for me that this is what music teaching is all about for me. And along the way, you pick up information. Information that supports you being able to do what you do. So, I don't know if this made things clear or made things fuzzy. You can let me know. But it's what came to me this morning to talk about amidst all the other things I thought I was going to talk about. So, thanks for watching, and you can either encourage or discourage me about all of these things. And thank you for being here. Such an exciting time. Lots of wonderful stuff going on. And I'm really grateful for it. And grateful that you're here. So, with that, I'll put the suitcase down and pick it up again tomorrow. Thanks.